I'm Dr. Orion Taraban, and this is PsycHacks, Better Living Through Psychology. And the topic of today's short talk is creating a monster. Over the duration of my career, I've done a lot of consultations with a lot of different men, and many have spoken to me about their unsatisfactory marriages and relationships. And this has allowed me to discover points of convergence throughout most of their cases. And I want to share some of my findings with you today. First and foremost, I've discovered that bad relationships are almost always based on poor selection. I cannot say this enough. You can't have any relationship with anyone. There's a whole chapter of my book on this concept alone. You can only have certain kinds of relationships with certain kinds of people. For whatever reason, certain people are not temperamentally or emotionally or psychologically able to have stable, peaceful, loving, long-term relationships. And it's not your job to figure out why or how to fix them so you can get what you want from them. If you insist that you should be able to have the relationship you want with the person you want to have it with, independent of whether or not that person can emotionally or psychologically do so, then, my friend, you're on the path of pain. It won't work out for you, but you'll only figure out that I'm right after years of conflict, heartache, and despair. No bueno. In any case, it's poor selection that is almost always to blame. But that doesn't really help someone who's already in a difficult relationship now, does it? He can't turn back the clock and pick someone else. And even if he could, would he? In any case, I'm going to spend the rest of today discussing the second most prevalent factor common to unsatisfactory relationships. After listening to the arguments and stalemates of hundreds of men, it has become clear to me that a lot of these men were complicit in creating the dynamics of which they complained. Now, they almost always did this unconsciously and unintentionally, but they did it nonetheless. I call this process creating a monster. In my experience, most monsters aren't born, they're created. Let me explain what this looks like using a very obvious example. Have you ever seen a little girl having a temper tantrum in a store because her father wouldn't buy her a toy? Chances are you've seen this happen. If not, it's fairly easy to imagine. Girl says she wants the toy. Father says no. Her eyes start welling up with tears. Girl says she wants the toy. Father says no. The child starts crying. Girl says she wants the toy. Father says no. The child flops down on the floor. Father says no, and now the girl is kicking and screaming. Father says no, and the kid yells, "I hate you." Father says no, and the girl threatens to call CPS and report him for child abuse. Father says no, and the kid starts to break and throw things. Father says no, and the girl starts hitting her own head against the floor. Now, the father has done a good job holding the line up until this point. However, if the stakes are now too high, if he suddenly caves and says, "Fuck it, fine, here's the goddamn toy, just stop it, okay?" then that parent would have created a monster that day. He certainly didn't mean to do that, but that's what he would do when he rewards the child for behaving like a monster. He taught the child the location of his thumbscrew, the emotional experience that he isn't willing or able to tolerate, and functionally instructed her in the behavioral protocol she needs to follow in order to get what she wants. The father could scold the child with his mouth afterwards, tell her that good girls don't act like that. He could sit down and have a conversation with her about her behavior and get a commitment from her not to behave like that in the future. He could use threats of future punishment to dissuade her from doing that again. But none of that really matters. None of these interventions are really going to work because he reinforced the bad behavior. Contingencies trump communication. If you appreciate the insights on this channel, I would highly encourage you to get your hands on a copy of my book, The Value of Others. Over the course of 432 pages, I delve deep into my economic model of relationships and explain the behavior of both men and women in the game of mating and dating. I also provide a lot of actionable advice on how to get and keep more of what you want in the sexual marketplace. Once you read The Value of Others, you'll never look at relationships the same way again. Now available in ebook, audiobook, and paperback formats. The links are in the description. The next time that child wants something, what do you think is going to happen? Her behavior is going to escalate to headbanging, probably even faster than the first time, because the parent has taught her that that is how to turn my no into a yes. All the child has to do is make things sufficiently uncomfortable for that parent, and he gives in. And the parent has taught the child that the most effective way of doing just that, in this case, is to hit your head against the floor. Over time, this transforms the child into a monster, which is obviously not good for the child, as no toy is worth such a metamorphosis, and it's certainly not good for the parent, who becomes increasingly angry, resentful, and hopeless. Giving in at that point was the worst possible thing that parent could have done. If the parent was honest with himself and understood that there was something his daughter could do that would cause him to fold, then it actually would have been better if the parent just got the kid the toy when her eyes started to well up. That way, not only would he not have had to deal with a temper tantrum at all, but he would have reinforced a much more manageable behavior as well. Basically, if you're going to give in, it's a good idea to give in as quickly as possible. On the other hand, the parent could have decided not to give in to the child no matter what. Not if she breaks stuff or calls CPS or screams until she loses her voice. Not if it takes hours and hours and hours of patience and self-control to hold the line. It doesn't matter. If he chose not to give in, no matter what, none of the bad behavior, though manifested, would have been reinforced. And this means that it would already have begun to disappear. Like, that kid might try those shenanigans a few more times, and it will likely be a very uncomfortable few more times for that parent. But if the parent holds firm, then the kid will eventually learn that shit doesn't work. And the child will eventually abandon that strategy in favor of some other kind of tactic or manipulation, because it's not so stupid that it will continue to execute behaviors that don't work and have never worked. Do you understand? Dealing with bad behavior is kind of like the prisoner's dilemma. If you're eventually going to give in, you should give in as quickly as possible. On the other hand, if you're not going to give in, you shouldn't give in no matter what. The reason why so many people end up in suboptimal situations is because they think they won't give in, but they weren't honest with themselves with respect to how they would stand up to escalation. Great. Now let's bring this over to adult relationships with women. Now, in most cases, the first issue is actually caused by the second. That is, the reason why so many women might be poor candidates for good relationships is not because they're like inherently broken, but because they were trained in monstrous behavior by other men in their lives, most likely their fathers or their exes. You're seeing that behavior in your current relationship because it worked in their previous relationships, and she's expecting that you won't be much different. Make sense? Now, don't think that the kind of behavior I just described is unique to dysregulated children. I have seen more than once with my own eyes grown women doing all of those things and more. The kind of shit that can happen in relationships behind closed doors is almost incomprehensible. In any case, it's quite possible that you have seen or will see behavior like this at some point. So the question men need to ask themselves is, how much am I willing to take? Of course, the most common thumbscrew in adult relationships is threatening to leave. Propose to me by the end of the year or we're done, kind of a thing. Many men give in at this point, but like the hypothetical father in the toy store, this is the very worst thing they could possibly do. All it does is make threatening the basis of the relationship more likely in the future. And you can't have a stable, harmonious, long-term relationship with someone who threatens the basis of the relationship every time she doesn't get what she wants. It's just not possible, my dudes. But here's the kicker. She only does this Because it works. And why does it work? Because you taught her that it works, my dude. In reality, that guy should have seen the ultimatum coming. Over a long enough timeline, it's almost inevitable. If that man were honest with himself and he understood that he wouldn't be able to emotionally tolerate losing that woman, then he shouldn't have waited for the ultimatum. By acting first, he not only avoids reinforcing monstrous behavior, but he also remains the leader of the relationship and the point of origin of his own decisions as well. On the other hand, if, for example, that man just doesn't want to marry that woman or doesn't want to marry, period, then he has to be willing to hold the line no matter what. And this includes the willingness to suffer the pain of losing any particular woman. Some women will leave, and in doing so, they kind of confirm your decision, as their behavior reveals that they love what they want more than they love you. So why would you increase your commitment? On the other hand, some women will stay, and if you resolve this challenge successfully, they will learn not to threaten the basis of the relationship in the future because you've taught them that it doesn't work. And of course, in adult relationships, there is a third option. You, the man, can remove yourself from the relationship. And I don't mean threaten to remove. I mean just remove. You can just leave. And you can just leave at the first red flag without waiting for the bad behavior to turn into a battle of wills. And you'll start to do this when you stop putting your desire for any particular woman ahead of your peace and your mission and your self-respect. So those are your three options, gentlemen. Either leave, concede as early as possible, or hold the line no matter what. Because if you're not honest with yourself and you mix up those strategies, you're going to have a monster on your hands. What do you think? Does this fit with your own experience? Let me know in the comments below. And please send this episode to someone who you think might benefit from its message, because it's word of mouth referrals like this that really help to make the channel grow. And anyone looking to join my free weekly newsletter or book a paid consultation can do so on my website. There's also my book, The Value of Others, and my member community, The Captain's Quarters. The links to everything are in the description below. Check them out. Lots of great resources there. As always, I appreciate your support, and thank you for listening.